TheFrXion here, or Tiger Tank 12, however you call me, I don't really care. And this time around, we are back in World of Tanks test server. We haven't been on the test server for a very long time. Now, since I do have some time, I thought I would make a video about the Object 277 and the K91, but obviously it's separate in two videos because it would just kind of be too long for that matter. And today we're going to be taking a look at the up-and-coming Soviet Tier 10 heavy tank, the Object 277, and we will obviously first take a look at its statistics, and then we'll have some gameplay to follow up the stats to see what kind of tank will be expecting us in the near future. So, first and foremost, I was kind of okay, let's start this again. I was kind of surprised that they announced the Object 277, because for a very long time rumors were spread around that the Object 777 version 2 was going to replace or be the Tier 10 successor to the T10. It looked very kind of, okay, it didn't look as similar as this tank does to the T10, but it looked kind of similar. It could have been, you know, in the same category. And then they kind of dropped this tank on us. I've never heard of this vehicle before, never seen screenshots. This is basically the first time I've looked at it. I haven't watched any other YouTubers about these tanks. I have had the test servers downloaded on my computer for quite a while now, but I haven't really tried any of the tanks, the new tanks out yet. So yeah. So first and foremost, if we take a look at this vehicle, you can see it resembles a T10, and if I do recall, the T10 is a fast kind of heavy tank that doesn't really fit into the bracket of a heavy tank except for its gun. Other than that, it's just kind of like a medium tank that has a very punchy big gun to use, and I think this is going to be very similar. And as always, we are going to see if that is the truth in the gameplay afterwards. So without further ado, I'd say let's take a look at its statistics, let's take a look at its origin, and then we can jump right over to the comparison, since we're going to be comparing this tank to some other Tier 10 Soviet and Chinese heavy tanks that are kind of similar with its playstyle. So developed in 1956 to 1958 at the Kirov plant in Leningrad, formerly known Leningrad, now it's St. Petersburg, once again, under the supervision of Josef Kotin. Two prototypes were produced and underwent trials from 1959 through 1960. A hull and a turret were produced for testing for shell resistance. The development was discontinued in the summer of 1960 due to insufficient development of certain systems and components. In addition, the vehicle did not demonstrate any advantage over the Object 770 heavy tank. So, very interesting. So they actually did produce this tank as a prototype, two of them, and they did do some tests with its armor. That makes the whole thing a little bit more interesting if there is a bit of historical accuracy to it, not just some blueprints, right? I mean, if we take a look at the T-57, for example, this is basically just a blueprint, a project that never was completely filled out. While on the other hand, tanks like the IS-7, the IS-4 were built, or even the Object 277, if we can believe the word wargaming is spreading. And I cannot validate that, or yeah, unfortunately I can't, because I don't have any access to that. So we're going to be comparing this tank to three other vehicles: WZ-111, the IS-7, and the 113. Now, all of these tanks are very similar from their guns, from their mobility, and basically their playstyle. They're low profile heavy tanks that do pack a punch and are decently armored. So let's take a look at firepower. Now, the very first thing you'll notice is that the WZ, the IS, and the Object 277 have all the same alpha damage. That is because they are running the same armament, or at least the same caliber. All of them are running 130mm caliber, while the 113 is running 122mm caliber. Now, pen-wise, the Object 277 has the best standard pen with 265, which is very, very impressive regarding that the pen is even better than some of the medium tanks. For example, the M48 Patton with 258 millimeters of penetration. Also, this tank is running APCR as secondary or premium ammunition, while the IS-7 is also running APCR. The WZ is using heat. Now, heat and APCR, obviously, they have different pros and cons. Heat is better against flat surfaces. It's going to be able to punch through tanks at very weird angles, as long as there is no real spaced armor in between or like tracks. And also, heat doesn't really travel through buildings. It will just get caught. APCR, on the other hand, is a faster and a round with more pen, but on the other hand, it doesn't do that crazy amount of pen on surfaces that aren't really suited for, like places that are ridiculously angled. So yeah, each one has pros and cons, and I think this is just a preference. I do enjoy my APCR more, but maybe if you're playing a tier 10 heavy tank, heat should be a bit more, should support you a bit more than APCR, basically, because you're going to be facing some super heavy tanks that you can't really even pen with APCR at some weird angles. So heat would actually give you an advantage in certain points. But yeah, that is basically just my perspective on the things. So rate of fire on this vehicle is also fairly decent, 6.18 rounds per minute. Now that is almost on the same level as the T125. Okay, it's a bit, the T125 has a better rate of fire, but at the same time it's a smaller caliber. So you'll do more damage, and you'll do more damage in most of the cases with the Object 277. Now, the turret traverse speed isn't that impressive on any one of those tanks, 27.73 degrees per second. Now, that's nothing to write home about, but the tank's turret is very heavily armored, as we will see later on, but it does lack gun depression and gun elevation, which is horrible. Like, the Soviet heavy tanks have worse gun depression than the Chinese tanks, 5.5 degrees of gun depression and only 15.5 degrees of gun elevation. That is really, really bad. Now that screams just much better gun elevation and depression on the WZ, even better than on the 113. The aim time, on the other hand, and the dispersion values are very interesting. This tank has an incredible good aim time of 2.13 seconds. Now that is almost on par with the T125. Dispersion 0.33 at 100 meters. That is fairly decent. So it does kind of seem that this tank has a very competitive gun, which can actually zoom in very fast and can snipe fairly decently as well. Moving on to armor. Survivability wise, this tank does have the least amount of hit points shared with the WZ. 140 millimeters of frontal armor, it's same as on the WZ, but if you remember the T10, you don't expect crazy amounts of frontal armor. It has the lower plate, which is the obvious weak spot, and can be penetrated quite easily by tier 8 tanks even, I think, that have more than 200 millimeters of penetration. Now the side armor does do fairly nicely with 112 millimeters, but it's not the same trollish armor that the IS-7 has, for example. So basically the tank doesn't have the best frontal or side armor, at least on the hull. But the turret is an entirely different story. Now the turret on this thing, if we take a look at it, is massive. It's a huge turret. It is almost half of the size of the vehicle, and it basically doesn't have any real weak spot except for the cupola on top that might be really difficult to penetrate anyhow, and it is almost 300 millimeters thick at the front, 290 millimeters thick. So basically you're going to be having a really bad time trying to get through this tank if it's in a hull down position. Hull down in this vehicle can be very annoying for anyone trying to take it out. 224 millimeters on the side. Wow, that is pretty impressive. Now, I mean, the Chinese tanks also have over 250 millimeters of frontal armor, also like 300 or 290, but they do have the cupola on top. If we take a look at the WZ, those cupolas are rather big and they do pose a big target, and that's just not the case with the Object 277, except if you're maybe taller than this tank, you can just shoot on top through the turret roof armor. But that doesn't really matter right here. So survivability wise, it's a very bad hull, or at least, I mean, it's an okay hull that can be penetrated quite easily if you know the weak spots. But it's a very nasty turret, like most of the other Soviet or communist tank designs out there. Mobility wise, this tank gets a lot more interesting again. Now, the T-10 is not a slow tank. You never expected the T-10 to be a slow moving vehicle, but the traverse speed did kind of still hamper its mobility a bit. But this tank does have a very, very quick acceleration. It actually moves up very fast, and it does have a top speed of 55 kilometers per hour. It's slower than the IS-7 on paper, but it actually moves around fairly quickly, and it is very mobile. Now, the traverse speed on this vehicle is certainly better than on the IS-7. It will allow you to, maneuver over to other places more quicker than the IS-7. And yeah, those 5 kilometers per hour pretty much do give you, are taken away for the better traverse speed, but I think the traverse speed is just that much better. Concealment wise, obviously it's a heavy tank, you're not expecting anything right there. Spotting wise, also 400 meters average view distance. Now that's nothing to write home about, but it's also not terrible, so I'd say that is on the average side. And to sum it all up, before we go right into the games, I'd say this vehicle right here has a very competitive gun, and it has a very, very strong turret, and it's very quick. Now, the weaknesses of this vehicle are basically the lack of front armor and side armor, and it's very, very bad gun depression and elevation angles, with only 5.5 degrees of gun depression and I think 18 degrees of gun elevation. That will get you into trouble a lot if there is no even playing field. If you're not playing against tanks on slope, like on flat surfaces, you're going to have a bad time because, well, you have to maneuver your tank in a very awkward kind of fashion to get these shots down at the enemy or up at the enemy. So I'd say without further ado, we've talked enough about the statistics of the tank. Let's go right into some games and see how this tank does fare in the battlefield. Today I thought I would make it a little bit different. I would do live action gameplay plus commentary. And that usually doesn't always work out, but today I have a good feeling about this. Because we're going to be playing the Object 277 on Malinovka. It's an encounter battle, and we have to push the hill. Now, after you have listened to all the things I've said, me rambling on about the lack of gun depression and elevation, you probably think this is a bad idea. But this tank does have its very, very good speed and a very, very punchy gun. So if we make it up to the hill fast enough, we might be able to negate the negative effects that we have with the gun elevation and gun depression. Now, unfortunately, this Object 705A is blocking us a bit right there. And let's see, oh, you can see that horrible gun elevation. And let's see just how quickly this tank zooms in. You can see it doesn't really take long to get this shot all zoomed in. And accuracy-wise, unfortunately, we did miss. But I'd say that wasn't fully zoomed in reticle. So that was kind of our fault. No real snapshot potential right there. Yeah, 542 damage. That's a very punchy gun. Accuracy-wise, I am quite surprised, since I'm not really used to Soviet tanks that are kind of fast and have very good accuracy, or decent accuracy for the matter of fact. And now we are in a very awkward position, because we're getting pushed by these tanks any second now. There is the object 277. And if we can stay hull down here, I think we can do a lot of damage. The only thing that might bother us is artillery, and this E100 might pull us into the battle right here if we're not doing that by ourselves. And we have to be careful with the object 268. That thing will not have any kind of troubles penetrating our lower plate or upper plate. But he is going to be struggling. Okay, I talked too soon. He managed to penetrate our cupola on top. Obviously with heat. We're playing on a test server, so everyone is firing heat. And there we go. We put a shot into the 57 while he's getting up. And you can see those hits, man. 513 damage is just nasty. We don't want to get another repetition of that shot from the object 268. This time around, he doesn't do any damage, fortunately for us. And we managed to do 495 damage to him while hitting that cupola. And you can see the rate of fire coupled with the alpha of this tank makes it very, very nice in these kind of engagements. Especially if you can keep the lower plate, your hull armor protected, you'll be able to do quite a lot of damage. Now, unfortunately, we didn't do any damage to the E4, but we did penetrate this cupola. Let's do it again, but this time we do damage. Yeah, 480, that's very beefy. These hits are, yeah, that was below average actually, because like 490 is average damage that you do with this tank. Let's see if we can side scrape our way out of here and penetrate him. And he actually manages to penetrate our side right there. So this is still one of those, it's still a T10, you know. It's basically a T10. Trying to side scrape with this tank is just, it's still very difficult because it does have like the very weak side armor and the skirts right there that make it like a bit angled outwards, so that you have a flat surface. And we're just gonna see if we can take out the E4. We actually managed to take him out of the game. And this artillery is still going at us. But I think it was his last shell. Yeah, that was another arty. Yeah, this tank doesn't hold up very nicely against arty. That was 629 damage from the T92, but it actually went right under my tank. And that was very nasty. So this E100 actually has to push, or is he just waiting for our arty to finish this up? Because I have to get into arty cover. Unfortunately, we don't kill him. Because you have to hit the side skirts. Oh, I think I'm toast. Actually, I'm not. You can see just how impressive this turret is. Yeah, that's what I expected arty to finish us off. So certainly it's a big tank, it's a big target. Don't get your ass out too far, don't be too aggressive like me right there. But I'd say the first test this tank has come up against with those very nasty tier 10s up there is, or has been quite successful. Oh god, I can't even talk anymore. We bounced quite a lot of shots from the other tanks right there, especially on our turret. Once we showed them a little bit of our hull armor, they were able to actually penetrate us. You can see right here the side skirt where it actually moves in together. It's not as angled as the T10 is. It's a bit more rounded, and I think this roundness does give you a little bit more of protection. But still, it's not that thick, especially if you're playing against tier 10s who have over 250 or 70 millimeters of penetration. They'll be able to go right through there and chew out your HP. But if you're able to stay below that, somewhere over here, you know, shoot at them from an angle, even with the 5.5 degrees of gun depression and the 18 degrees of gun elevation that we only have on this tank, we were still able to actually shoot these guys quite reliably. Artillery did ponder our success here a little bit, but yeah, I'd say that was totally our fault for not going into, you know, diving into arty cover. That's what you expect when you're playing against arties, especially on the test server where everyone is shooting premium ammunition, because it doesn't really affect their standard accounts. Yeah, I'd say I'm very positively surprised by the very sufficient and nice hull or general turret armor that you have, and I'm very positive about the gun. This 130mm gun with that nasty alpha and that beautiful pen really does mark this tank as one of those vehicles that can be very versatile in close combat and even further ranges. So I'd say we jump into the next battle and we'll see how this tank does in some other scenarios. We're playing on the map Tundra, and this time around we're actually going to the one spot where medium tanks and light tanks usually go to. And that is going to be E and F8 and 9. Both of these positions are very difficult to reach if you do not have the speed of a medium tank or a light tank, and thus you are kind of caught in a very awkward brawl where you're trying to get to the hill, but at the same time you can't really reach it because there are certain tanks that really want to destroy you on the other side. And well, if you don't have the speed and you're too slow, like for example E5 or something like that, you can't really get there. But in a tank like the Object 277 that can go all the way up to 55 kilometers per hour, you might just be able to get up there fast enough to not get all the shots in. Now, these medium tanks certainly are still quicker than you are, but you can see that we are not far behind. And this position right here should actually fit this tank very nicely, because we can hide our lower plate and we can only give him our upper turret or our upper plate. The upper plate at this angle is still going to be fairly effective, and you can see that this tank can just go to work with its rate of fire, with its pen, and with its alpha damage. Now we don't want to get hit by the tank destroyer over there, who is hiding his turret, but still sticking out a little bit. And you can just see the accuracy on this tank is rather phenomenal. I'm still very surprised that Wargaming would add a tank that has such accuracy. It does seem to be quite strong at the moment. If it is overpowered, well, that is another question, but it certainly does have very nice attributes that do speak for itself. We do miss that shot, unfortunately, though. But yeah, so it's very similar to the T10. It plays like a bigger buffer version of that said T10, and I think that's exactly what Wargaming are trying to go for with this vehicle. If we would cross over here with our 115 millimeters of side armor, we would probably catch around by one of these FVs in the back, and yeah, that would not look nice because they would definitely be able to penetrate us. So we're just going to track this Progetto 65. Both of these tank destroyers shouldn't be able to hit us right here at this position, and I don't want to peek like this. I'm not even sure if I can side scrape correctly because there's not a lot of space right here. But yeah, you can see he's trying to pen us, or he just wanted to track us. I'm not even sure. But he did track us, and now the question is, will we be able to actually... Oh, actually we're able to put a shot into him. He isn't able to put a shot into us because we're kind of covering our upper and lower plate here fairly nicely. And we're gonna see if we can... Actually, no, we're not gonna do it again. It might just be the problem that these enemy tanks are just shooting like heat, and it might make this tank look like very strong. But it's not too difficult to penetrate this tank frontally if you give it a little bit of time and you really look where you shoot. but it doesn't seem like that the enemy team is very much interested in shooting the right positions to get any damage in. I mean, they can permatrack me for whatever time they want. It's not gonna give them any what is he trying to do? Like, I can just repair my tracks. You know what? We're gonna repair our tracks right now. That was a big mistake from the bad chat, since that was a big mistake by the other object 277. And now we are at a very awkward junction because we have the hill, but we obviously will not be able to survive a hit by the FV. Yeah, this is very awkward. I don't want to drive in front of the FV, but I want to show you guys like the very, very, very vulnerable part that this armor does have. We're not going to shoot him because that would probably bounce. There we go. Now we're going to push him. Oh, impressive. I bounced that shot. 140 millimeters of armor is still 140 millimeters of armor at this angle. So if you're driving past them and they don't get a nice shot at you, well, it's going to be very awkward for them. And it's very awkward for this STRBV. They're all shooting my upper glaciers, and it doesn't really work out for them. So we're just gonna take on this FV, and we're gonna go with the STRB. 4,600 damage bounced. And that one actually went right through. I have no idea. I think he shot my upper plate, probably. I have no idea how this guy is playing his tank. I hate shooting STRVs. So yeah, he managed to penetrate our upper plate. If any one of those guys would have just shot my upper plate right there, or my lower plate right there, they would have been able to penetrate me. The game did decide to crash. But that doesn't really bother us. So I'd say we will just give a little bit of a verdict on this tank right now in the garage. So basically you saw me play 2 games where we had very, very good positions. We were in there very quickly. But this tank has its drawbacks. Don't worry, it's not going to be overpowered as other tanks are, the Object 268 version 4, for example. This tank certainly is very weak in the front. Like, the frontal, lower, and upper plate are very easy to penetrate. If you get one of these tanks out in the open and you can shoot the lower plate, you are almost certain to penetrate it. The upper plate as well is very weak. It is a bit angled, it's a bit more rounded, so it's a bit more difficult to penetrate. For, like, example, if we compare it with the T10 was a bit more, angled, less rounded shaped, and it was very easy to put a shot right through it. And especially if you're a bigger tank than this, you will be able to shoot down on top of it. This viewport right here should be a good designated target where you can penetrate this vehicle actually. It's still kind of awkward to be able to reliably penetrate it, the upper plate at least, if you do not have over 280 millimeters of pen, because it is still rounded, it's still shaped like this, and it's still angled. But if you shoot this tank at the side, at the rear, it's still a very easy target to kill. In an all-down position, as you can see, it's very powerful, it's very strong. The turret, the cupola on top, can be or is a weak spot, but it wasn't that reliable, especially since that Object 268 version 4 did bounce off the cupola twice, or with heat, and that says something. So basically at this point, I'd say this tank, it's still subject for change. I think it is balanced enough. especially if we compare it to the Object 268 version 4, but we shouldn't compare it to the Object 268 version 4 because that thing is imbalanced. So I'd say this tank does have very, very good gun, good mobility, and it does look like a very nice successor to the T10. Is it a bit strong right now? Well, yeah, I think they could reduce a little bit of the frontal armor even, or like add a bit more of a weak spot on the turret. I don't know, because right now it's maybe a bit hard to kill it if it is in one of those very nice, relaxing positions where it can just do whatever it wants to do. But other than that, I think if this tank is in a one-on-one outside, it doesn't have any real armor, doesn't have any real protection, like rubble or something like that. It's not going to be able to do that much. The gun is very nice, yes, but it's not going to be able to bounce all the shells, especially from the lower plate. Upper plate right here is a bit of a different story. Can still be penetrated, but it's a bit thicker than the T10, I think. The T10's upper plate, if we take a look at the T10, we do have that tank in the garage. You can see that the T10 is more angled. It's a bit... Actually, it's pike nose design, but you can still easily penetrate the upper plate of the T10. It's 120 millimeters thick on the front. Yeah, obviously the Object 277 has a bit more frontal armor, but it's not as angled. So it's not this pike nose design where you can just shoot this area and, you know, go through. It's a bit more rounded, so it's a bit more difficult. But if you shoot over here a bit more to the right, you'll be able to penetrate the tank because it's still angled, like, you know, that with that front. Yeah, it's a very good tank. I'm enjoying it as it stands right now. I would love to hear your guys' opinion. Those were just 2 games, obviously. And test server, as always, it's kind of weird. People are sometimes not really aiming their shells when they're shooting heat and premium ammo around. I think that is a misconception of, you know, a lot of people always think like with heat and stuff like that, you'll be able to, you know, penetrate every single round, but that's just not true because you'll still have to aim for those, you know, spots. If you just shoot the tracks and the side armor at a ridiculous angle, you'll not be able to penetrate this tank. I think that stands for any vehicle. So yeah. This is basically my preview of this tank. I hope you guys did enjoy it. As always, if you did, comment, like, and subscribe. And tell me if you're excited about this tank, because I certainly am. So I see you guys in the next one.